He has been published in the Nashville Scene, the Memphis Commercial Appeal, the Knoxville News Sentinel, and Lit Hub, and we are delighted that he lives right in the neighborhood in Nashville. So please help me welcome Ed Tarkington.
Thank you so much, Kathy. Can y'all hear me all right?
Yes.
I'm really honored to be here speaking to the Friends of Tennessee Libraries because, as is the case with many writers, my life as a writer began in a library, specifically the library at Paul Monroe Elementary School in Lynchburg, Virginia, where I grew up. It was there that I first discovered my first favorite books: Johnny Tremain, My Brother Sam is Dead, Amos Fortune, Free Man, and Dear Mr. Henshaw. I don't remember much about those books, but I remember how they moved me and what I learned from them. I remember that Johnny Tremain taught me something about early American history, but what I really remember was the chapter where Johnny's hand is maimed by molten silver from a cracked crucible handed to him by a rival who wanted to hurt him. I remember imagining how that must have felt. I could feel it in the tension of the language. And I thought a lot about what it would be like to lose the use of a hand, and moreover to be turned so cruelly and unfairly from a secure future and be forced to start all over again. I remember learning a little about American history from My Brother Sam is Dead too. But what I remember most about that book was learning that fathers and sons can love each other and yet be unable to understand each other. I learned that love is not always strong enough to hold a family together, and that I shouldn't take my own family for granted. I learned that even people who are fighting for what they believe to be a just cause can be blinded by their passion and become cruel or even evil. And I learned about loss and grief. Amos Fortune, Free Man also taught me something about early American history, the part of which we are rightly ashamed, the part that even now some people would prefer that kids like I was not learn about in school. I suppose because the truth is sometimes painful, and it can be very hard to reconcile the bad with the good. I learned about how long ago in a distant land a prince was kidnapped and sold into slavery on the other side of the world, and about how he refused to be robbed of his pride and his dignity, and about how he worked tirelessly to liberate himself and to start a new life, and against all odds to build a prosperous business and earn the respect of people who had once not even seen him as fully human. Amos Fortune, Free Man was transformative for me in my understanding of race in American history, and I consider it to be one of the most important and influential books I've ever read. I owe that gift to a librarian. I am grateful for the courage that librarians show in sharing stories like these and helping children understand the painful truth, but also see that mistakes in the past don't have to define us and can provide opportunities for redemption and reconciliation. Finally, there's Dear Mr. Henshaw by the great Beverly Cleary, which was put directly into my hands by the school librarian straight out of the box. I was the first kid in the school to check it out. I did not learn anything about American history from Dear Mr. Henshaw. But I did learn that the life of a kid not much different from me could be worthy of writing a book about. I learned that all of our lives are stories, and they all deserve to be told. I also learned, or at least considered for the first time, that somewhere out there in the world was a person to whom the name under the title after the word by belonged, who was at that moment living and breathing, maybe taking a nap or having lunch, maybe driving their kids to school, maybe sitting at a desk writing another book. This is when I first began to consider the idea of what it meant to be a writer. Through Lee's letters to and from Mr. Henshaw, I got the idea that writers were wise and kind and trustworthy. Like Lee, I began to believe that the writers of the books I loved understood something about me. I discovered the magic of how a book can make its reader see themselves in the characters on the page, how a book can make its reader feel as if it was written just for them. Wouldn't it be something to be able to do that for someone, I thought. At every place I've ever lived or worked since, I have been drawn to libraries, sometimes just to be in a place that smells like books and the past, with tall ceilings and long halls and echoes of footsteps on tiles and wood floors periodically breaking a solemn silence. It reminds me of Philip Larkin's wonderful poem, Church Going. A serious house on serious earth it is, in whose blent air all our compulsions meet, are recognized and robed as destinies. And that much can never be obsolete, since someone will forever be surprising a hunger in himself to be more serious and gravitating with it to this ground, which he once heard was proper to grow wise in. So in a very clear sense, I owe my life as a writer to libraries and to librarians. Through your service, so many of you are doing for so many people what librarians and libraries have done for me in making that possible. I'm not talking about making future writers, though certainly you're doing that too. I'm talking about helping people know, whether through the lives and worlds they discover inside the walls of a library, or simply through the patience and the comfort and the kindness of a librarian, that they're not alone in the world. No matter what, there will always be a warm place in the winter, and a cool place in the summer to go sit and read, or just listen to the echoes of those footsteps, or the voices of children, perhaps discovering their own Johnny Tremaine, their own My Brother Sam is Dead, their own English Fortune Free Man, their own Dear Mr. Henshaw. I think you know what I mean, because I think we're all here for the same reason, because at some point or another, we were all those children. So thank you for that. My life as a writer may have begun in the library at Palmer Elementary School, but the path from there to the day I first experienced the great joy of opening up a package from New York and taking out the first copy of my first book was long, winding, and fraught with difficulty. I had a lot to learn. I knew from that young age that I wanted to be a writer, but I had no idea how to do it. I spent half my 20s trying to be Jack Kerouac and the other half learning how to be a teacher. Eventually, I went to graduate school at Florida State where my habits improved, though I still lacked a clear sense of purpose beyond the desire to be a writer of the manly man ilk, whatever that meant. My heroes were Philip Roth and Richard Ford, Cormac McCarthy and Robert Stone, Dennis Johnson and Bob Chakotchis, my mentor at Florida State, whom I attached myself like a remora. I spent a lot of time misbehaving, wrote a lot of short stories, almost all of them unpublished, and began work on a novel, a Western noir thriller about an alcoholic district attorney and an ex-con Vietnam vet who get caught between drug dealers and the corrupt local sheriff of a land-grant town in northern New Mexico. A few years later, nearing the end of my degree program, I was married with a baby on the way. I needed to get a job with health insurance. I'd briefly taught at an independent school years before, so I knew how that world worked. I lucked into a job at Montgomery Bell Academy, and we moved. Everyone warned me that teaching high school would mean the end of my writing ambitions, but I refused to be thwarted. It took a few years, but I finally finished that novel, which was good enough to interest an agent. Despite the occasional bit of encouraging feedback, however, the book went nowhere. My agent had made it very clear to me that she didn't always get a sale, but I had been so sure of myself. The novel had all the stuff I thought was cool. Hard drinking and hard drug use, graphic violence worthy of a Tarantino film, hard, stoic men being manly in the mountains. What went wrong? Try again, my agent told me, you're still young. Was I? I was about to turn 37. I didn't feel young. I felt defeated and tired. But I'm stubborn. Just ask my wife. I wrote a second novel, finishing a draft in less than a fifth of the time it had taken me to write the first one. There was a quick flurry of interest from editors, but still no deal. My agent, who had already sunk hundreds of hours into my career for nary a nickel, and hence will be my hero for life, remained hopeful. I have a good feeling about this one, she said. Have faith. Half a year later, with no contract in sight, I could feel my 40th birthday bearing down the clock of my writing life ticking louder and louder, creeping toward the expiration of hope. Driving to work one morning, bleary-eyed and defeated, I sent up a half-hearted, ironic prayer. Dear God, I said, if you'll let me have a book deal before I turn 40, I promise I'll take it like a man. Almost instantly, the cab of my truck filled up with blue light. For a brief second, I thought to myself, God. Then I pulled over and sat there fuming while a stoic, manly man police officer wrote me a speeding ticket. Anyone who has ever worked seriously at writing fiction has some version of the same story. The sacrifice of time in relationships, crippling self-doubt, the failures and rejections and moments of humiliation. I know I'm not the only writer who's flat out prayed for a book deal, but I might be the only one whose prayers queued up a speeding ticket. I always tell this story self-effacingly. I joke at my own expense, a witty anecdote to prove how humbled I was by futility, how good I'd become at embracing my own ridiculousness. But eventually I recognized the subtext in it that explains a lot about what I was doing wrong as a writer for a very long time. I'll take it like a man, I'd said to myself. Now what did that mean exactly? Many of my sins in both life and prose had sprung from an urge to imitate the romantic, macho rebel type of writer I admired, but to whom I didn't bear much real resemblance. Guys like Jack Kerouac and Neil Cassidy, Ken Kesey and Barry Hannah. I tried to behave the way I imagined they would behave, write the way they wrote. My first book was in fact essentially an homage to Robert Stone's Dog Soldiers, but with fewer female characters, more violence, and less to be optimistic about. At 37, I couldn't hold up that illusion anymore. I was no outlaw. I was a high school teacher, wrestling coach, and a father of young girls. I knew the words to all the kids' show theme songs on PBS, and the names of all the Disney princesses and their pets. I had come to regard Ratatouille, The Incredibles, and Elf as cinematic masterpieces equal to The Godfather and Citizen Kane. I quit smoking and drink a lot less. Instead of tough guys and outlaws, I spend most of my time with my family or with other teachers and parents at the school where I work and the school my daughters attend. And of course, I spend many hours with many bright, curious students. I still revere the writers I tried to emulate, but I couldn't pretend to be like them anymore. So I returned to where I'd started, the memory of growing up in a small southern town in the late 1970s and early 1980s, in a family that was both typical and strange. I'd shied away from that place for years, afraid the soil wasn't deep enough in which to root the kind of novel I thought I was supposed to write. With no small amount of trepidation, I abandoned the stoic anti-heroes in the mountains and turned back to what really interests me, what I worry about, what obsesses me. Memory and longing, family and community, love and betrayal, reconciliation and redemption. The book that came out of that process is called Only Love Can Break Your Heart. Now, as it turns out, just a few hours after I got that speeding ticket, a solid month before I turned 40, I got a call from my agent. I am not making this up, same day. When the big call came, I was in the middle of teaching a class, Honors American Literature. I don't usually answer the phone when I'm working, but this was a call I had to take. I went behind my desk and talked quietly, trying to hide my exhilaration while my students pretended not to be eavesdropping. When I put down the phone, they gazed at me expectantly. "Just sold my book," I said. What happened next genuinely surprised me. One by one, the boys rose to their feet, clapping and cheering. I sat behind my desk, blushing and flustered, too happy to stop smiling. It was as sweet a moment as it sounds, and here's why. When I recognized the pride and excitement in my students' eyes, I remembered why I started writing. Not for Cormac McCarthy or Dennis Johnson or Robert Stone, but for that boy in the library at Paul Monroe Elementary School in Lynchburg, Virginia, reading Dear Mr. Henshaw as if it had been written just for him. A lot of wonderful things happened to me after the publication of Only Love Can Break Your Heart in 2016. among them a contract to write another novel. When I started thinking about what story I wanted to tell next, my mind went back to those boys I spend my days with. I've been doing this long enough now to see a lot of those boys become men. A few of them are now even my colleagues. If you know anything about MBA, you're probably aware that the school has a history stretching back more than 150 years, that its alumni include many of Nashville's most distinguished and influential men. You might also be aware of its reputation for rigor, for having a really good football team, for being very traditional, and for having financial resources which provide, among many other things, a great deal of financial aid, which continues to increase and improve the school's diversity and inclusivity. I have taught the sons of billionaires, senators and congressmen and governors and mayors. I've also taught boys who grew up in public housing and attend the school on financial aid. I've seen some really incredible and arguably beautiful stories come out of some of the relationships formed between the kid who has it all, materially speaking at least, and the kid who has next to nothing. I've also watched the poor and middle-class kids wrestle with the conflict between their gratitude to have been afforded access to a wonderful learning opportunity and their understandable insecurity about how they should feel when they first step into a house with an entry hall big enough to swallow their own modest homes maybe 3 times over. I've seen some slip seamlessly into that world and others grow resentful. I got very interested in the idea of telling a story from the point of view of a boy like one of them. The kid who comes from nothing and suddenly finds himself in the company of wealthy boys who couldn't possibly comprehend the extent of their advantages because they've never really known anyone who doesn't share them. Now, I've seen some of those boys mature into young men whose inherited privilege, combined with their talents and ambition, has positioned them to hold the reins of power in public life as well as in the private sector. I've studied the trajectories of their predecessors and others of their ilk here in Tennessee and beyond, and watched them grapple with crisis points in which their only option may be the lesser of 2 evils. I wanted to write about how it might feel to have to decide which is which. I wanted to write about how good people with good intentions can take flight and end up drifting very far from where they intended to land. Now, when I decided to write a story about a friendship between a poor boy and a rich boy, which began at a school like MBA, I toyed with the idea of setting it elsewhere. I didn't want people to think that I lacked imagination, or worse, that I was writing about the school itself and actual people who live here. Since the publication of The Fortunate Ones, I've definitely experienced more than a few moments when I wished I had given in to those fears. Perhaps because of the way marketing works in the publishing industry, or because of the popularity of confessional memoirs, or the notion that one has to have lived through something to have the right to tell a story about it, there's this perception these days that a novel which feels realistic or relevant to contemporary issues must therefore be based on actual people, places, and events. It seems a lot of people don't understand how a writer of realistic contemporary fiction just gets an idea from real life, internalizes it, and transforms it into something completely invented, but which feels as if it could be true. Or that a writer can invent a narrator and describe the world through that person's eyes as they would see it, without seeing it that way themselves. And anytime you're writing about a place or a milieu over which people feel a sense of ownership, or with which they identify strongly, you are going to step on some people's toes. The problem was I just couldn't think of a better place to set it. For one thing, I started writing around the time that TV show Nashville was on. Y'all remember that? Where a lot of Nashvillians were watching it and sort of cringing at how it perpetuated the stereotype that the whole city revolves around the country music industry, and everyone wears boots and a 10-gallon hat and hangs out on Lower Broadway, when most of us are city folk who have never ridden a horse and don't go anywhere near the honky tonks unless we're taking folks who are visiting us from out of town down there to show them how crazy it all is. I wanted to correct that misconception. I also wanted to capture the changes this city has undergone in the past 2 or 3 decades. It's hard to think of an American city which has undergone such dramatic growth and change at such a rapid pace from the last decade of the 20th century to the present moment. And while the characters and situations and the fortunate ones live and occur in many contexts, Nashville seems to me perhaps the best, if not only place to explore their conflict and contradictions. Nashville's exponential growth has exacerbated an ongoing identity crisis, an ongoing clash between the New South and the Old, with all the baggage those two concepts carry. Given the bitter polarization that has become the central narrative of American life since 2016, I knew that this was the right place to explore conflicts and contradictions that were gnawing at me when I decided to write a book about how we got to this point and how good people can end up going to dark places when the stakes get high and they come to believe that the ends justify the means. I wanted to write about how every aspect of our lives today is still conditioned by battles that started centuries ago. I wanted to write about the love-hate relationship between the have-nots and the haves, and the often destructive allure of wealth and the perils of noblesse oblige. I wanted to write about people who are neither good nor bad, people who misunderstand each other or grow apart or make regrettable choices but must still find a way to move forward. I wanted to tell the story of a person who evolves from naivety to idealism to disillusionment to reconciliation and forgiveness for himself as much as for anyone who might have hurt him in the past. I wanted to write about what a beautiful and painful thing love can be. Now more than ever, the world outside of novels is cast in stark shades, free of nuance. People have become so accustomed to one-dimensional portraits of those with whom they differ, or who come from a place unrecognizable to them, that we seem to have given up on even trying to understand each other. This is why stories matter. A novel is a mirror we hold up to see ourselves more clearly, to understand the complexity of human character and the universality of human experience. I wanted to write a book that would honor that conviction. I also wanted to tell a good story. William Faulkner once said, "There is nothing worth writing about but love, money, and death." I took those words to heart when I wrote this book. Now, I would like to share with you a few pages from an early chapter after Charlie, who is the narrator, is befriended by Arch Cray, who is the golden boy of Belmead that he meets during his first visit to the fictional Yeatwood school, which he attends. Now, the very first chapter indicates to us, it starts in when Charlie is grown up and is now a soldier stationed at Fort Campbell, and while in the process of doing his job as a soldier, he learns that Arch, who is now a U.S. Senator, has committed suicide. And so the rest of the novel is really kind of how did we get there? How did we get to how these two drifted so far from each other, how Charlie ends up in the Army, and what happened and why Arch ended up choosing to take his own life. But I thought that I would start here for you, just at that moment when when Charlie first begins to get introduced to the world that kind of consumed him and changed his life forever. I can still see the great house on the boulevard as I did on that first day. The drawing room with the toile settee and the velvet empire sofa and armchairs, and oil paintings of landscapes and portraits of prize-winning horses and hunting dogs and distant ancestors. The crystal chandelier descending from the high vaulted ceiling. The dining room with its broad teak table, the inlaid sideboard with the silver tea set, the hand-painted wallpaper depicting scenes from medieval China. Outside the windows, the bright blooms of heirloom roses. I followed Arch out the French doors, onto the stone porch, and down through the rose garden, toward the pool and the small white house next to it. Across from the diving board stood a fountain trimmed with a tile mosaic. On the other end, a slate path led to open doors for pool house. Inside, someone hidden by the back of a large couch was playing Punch-Out on the TV. "Typical," Arch said as we came in. "Beautiful day, sweetest backyard pool in Tennessee, and Jamie Halton's inside playing video games." Rounding the couch, he snatched up a remote control from the coffee table and pressed the power button. The screen went dark. "Damn it, Arch!" a voice cried. Arch picked up a can of Coors Light from the tabletop and shook it. "Give me that," the boy said. He stood up and snatched at the beer, which Arch dangled in front of him like a dog's chew toy. I recognized him from school. We had 2 classes together, math and history. Jamie Halton straightened himself and cocked his head. "Hey," he said. We must have been thinking the same thing, that we were being set up like a play date. "Charlie, Jamie," Arch said. "Jamie, Charlie." He emptied the beer into the bar sink and tossed it into a garbage can. "Damn it, Arch," he said. "Shut up, dumbass," Arch said. "Come on, you need a little vitamin D." We'd just come out of the pool house when she appeared. The loveliest girl I'd ever seen, emerging from the rose garden, traipsing across the yard in an oversized white t-shirt and a pair of white-framed Wayfarers, a thick paperback book under her arm. "Is this Charlie?" the girl asked. "I told her about you," Arch said. "Charlie, this is Vanessa, Jamie's twin sister." "Nice to meet you, Charlie," she said. "Hi," I replied. Vanessa pulled her t-shirt over her head to reveal a 2-piece seersucker bathing suit. She walked around to one of the lounge chairs and settled in to read her book. She was still very much a girl, just shy of 15, but she had emerged from the chrysalis. Were it not for their matching blonde hair, no one would ever believe she and Jamie were twins. The only features that betrayed her youth were the braces on her teeth and a stray pimple near the corner of her mouth, which could have easily been mistaken for a beauty mark. "What you reading?" Arch asked. "Sense and Sensibility," she said. "Last of my summer reading books. The quiz is on Monday." "Can't be any worse than Black Boy," he said. "It's actually pretty good," she said. "Did you do all of your summer reading, Charlie?" I nodded. I'd read the books the first week of summer and had scanned back over them every night, thinking about what kind of questions I might ask about them on the first day of class to show how carefully I'd read. "Which did you like best?" Vanessa asked. "A Separate Piece," I said. "Oh, please," Jamie said. "I've never been so bored in my life." "I thought it was good," I said. "You're a terrible liar," Jamie said. I did like A Separate Piece. It was about a prep school for boys. Every page seemed pregnant with precious intelligence. I regarded it less as a story than as a user's manual. Jamie grinned and gave me a playful punch so I would know he hadn't intended to embarrass me, or if he had, he wanted to walk it back. "Just messing with you," he said. We didn't do much of anything that afternoon, but it was all a dazzlement to me. Splashing around in the pool, lounging on recliners, listening to the radio. Arch performing jackknife dives and backflips. Vanessa reading on her recliner. I was marveling at the fine shape of Vanessa's calves when a shadow falling across the pool startled me out of my daydream. Mr. Halton loomed over us in his shirt sleeves. "Hey, Uncle Jim," Arch said. We climbed out of the pool to greet him. "Hello again, young man," Jim said. "Hello, sir." Feeling his powerful fingers squeezing my own, I found it unfathomable that Jim Halton could ever have been a boy himself. "How are you liking Gateman so far?" "It's great," I said. "Arch here taking care of you?" "Yes, sir." He slipped his hand into the pocket of his suit pants. I heard the sound of jangling keys. "Hey there, son," Jim said. "Good day at school?" "Yeah," Jamie said, "I guess." "Great. Say, kids, I'm meeting a few fellas downtown to go over a deal. Your mother wants to order in tonight. Would you mind calling the club, Vanessa? Ask Carl to run it over." "Okay, Daddy," she said. He turned and strode across the lawn. The moment his father disappeared through the French doors on the other side of the rose garden, Jamie went back into the pool house and emerged holding a beer. Vanessa let out a long, low sigh. "It's just a beer," Jamie said. Vanessa closed her book. "I'm going inside to call the grill," she said. "Arch, are you and Charlie staying for dinner?" "Do you mind?" Arch asked. "Not at all. Charlie, what would you like?" "They have good cheeseburgers," Arch said. "That sounds good," I said. "Order some seasoned fries," Jamie said. She slipped her t-shirt back over her head and started off toward the house. "I'll be back in a few," Arch said. He toweled himself off and jogged after Vanessa. Jamie went back into the pool house. I walked in after him. "They'll be a while," he said. "You want a beer?" He held the can out toward me. "Okay," I said. I sat down on the couch next to him. Jamie turned on the television. "So, Arch and Vanessa," I said, "are they—" "What?" Jamie said. "Boyfriend and girlfriend?" "Not yet. Arch just recently got interested now that it looks like Vanessa's going to turn out hot. I mean, we're practically related. Technically, it's not incest, I guess, but it's pretty close." "Well, we are in Tennessee," I said. Jamie let out a harsh, barking laugh. "So what's your deal?" he asked. "What do you mean?" "You know, your deal. Where are you from? What do you do? What brought you here to my humble abode? You're clearly not a ringer." "What's a ringer?" I asked. "You know, a ringer," he said. "A stud athlete meant to bring glory to the empire." The fact that most of my non-white classmates were talented athletes had not escaped my attention. I remembered what Terrence had said about his cousin. "So what's your special talent?" he asked. "All the scholarship kids are good at something." "How do you know I'm on scholarship?" I asked. "Come on," he said. "Where'd you get your shoes? Payless?" My face flushed hot. I took a big gulp from the beer. "I'm just curious," Jamie said. "Are you a mathlete, a violinist? Did you build a nuclear reactor in your closet? You must be bringing something to the table." "What do you bring to the table?" I asked. He rolled his eyes. "Look around," he said. Jamie, at least, was always honest with himself. Most Yankman boys, many of who lived in similar opulent surroundings, maintained the delusion that they had earned their places through their intrinsic merits. Jamie knew exactly what he brought to the table. He was neither proud nor ashamed. It was just a fact. "So what do you do?" he asked. Thought about it. Did I have a gift? I'd considered myself a promising student, but after only a week at Yankman, I discovered myself to be decidedly mediocre. What else was I good at? "Pretty good at drawing," I said. "So you're an artist," he said. "Yeah." "Cool." We sat together playing Punch-Out for what seemed like a very long time, Jamie draining beer after beer. By the time Arch returned with the takeout, the evening had grown cool and fragrant with the scent of the magnolia trees surrounding the pool. No one asked what had become of Vanessa. I assumed she was having dinner with her mother. Arch flipped on the pool lights, turning everything cornflower blue. On the other side, across the lawn, the house was lit up like the Magic Kingdom at Disney World. Indeed, the whole effect of the evening was quite magical, save for Jamie's crack about my cheap shoes and the collection of spent beer cans that was accumulating on the pool deck. At some point, Jamie wandered off toward the trees behind the pool, returning with 3 beers in his hands. Arch stood. "No thanks," he said. "Gotta drive Charlie home. Come to think of it, we probably ought to get going." I said goodbye to Jamie with a timid wave and followed Arch back across the lawn. Just inside the kitchen door, he came to an abrupt stop. Standing before the refrigerator, the door open, was a slim blonde woman who looked to be about 50, holding an open bottle of white wine by the neck in one hand and a half-full glass in the other. Her long white bathrobe had fallen open, revealing a silk nightgown beneath. She gazed at us with a benumbed expression. "Oh," Arch said. "Hi, Aunt Cece, we were just leaving." Aunt Cece, Mrs. Halton. She teetered a bit. I worried that she might drop the bottle or the glass, step into the shards with her bare, tender feet. "Where's Vanessa?" Arch asked. Mrs. Halton muttered something as she tipped the bottle and splashed wine into her glass. "Vanessa!" Arch called back into the house. Mrs. Halton shuffled forward toward the island countertop. Without thinking, I took the bottle and placed it on the marble surface and grasped her hand. She turned toward me and opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. "This is Charlie, Aunt Cece," Arch said. Vanessa appeared in the doorway. "Thought you'd gone to bed," she said. She reached for the wine glass. "Come on, Mother," she said. "Let's go upstairs." Mrs. Haltom jerked her hand back, splashing wine on her nightgown. Arch stepped forward and slung her arm around his shoulder. "Go wait in the truck," he said to me. A few minutes later, Arch came out of the house, climbed into the truck, and started the engine. "I'm sorry you had to see that," he said, as we rolled down the long driveway. If anything, I felt relieved. In Montague Village, where I lived, someone's mother staggering around blind drunk didn't arouse much notice. It was somehow reassuring to learn that such things also happen on Bellevue Boulevard. When we reached Montague, Arch parked and cut the engine, perhaps waiting to see if I would invite him in. I had no intention of doing so, but neither was I eager to part from him. "I guess I should be going," he said. "See you Monday." "Okay." I stepped out and shut the door and stood watching as Arch navigated out of the parking lot, following his taillights down the narrow side street until he made the turn onto Gallatin and disappeared. Since I have a few minutes, I'll share with you also kind of what happens in the second half of the book, where Arch grows up and decides to get into politics, and Charlie, having been told he was an artist, becomes one. The last week of May, Arch gave the commencement address at Yeatman, an eerie echo of my own graduation. Arch knew what a powerful platform the lectern at a Yeatman commencement could be, a captive audience which included many of the city's most affluent and influential citizens. He was not naive to the length of his odds. Arch's sole experience in politics had been a term on the school board, where his most memorable accomplishment had been a concerted effort to blow the whole thing up. Citing irreconcilable dysfunction and well-intentioned but incompetent school board members, Arch had sent a letter to the mayor's office and the news media calling for a resolution to disband the elected school board and return to a system where the mayor appointed representatives of his own choosing. Speaking as one myself, I believe our school board representatives want what's best for our young people, Arch had written in the letter, but as a whole, we lack the experience, expertise, and available time to accomplish our aims. Off the record, he'd been blunt. It was an idiot circus, he told me, run by some of the stubbornest jackasses who ever stumbled out of the barn. The initiative died, but its failure turned out to be a boon for Arch. The newspapers painted him as a truth-telling idea man. He didn't have the support of the mayor's office or the city council, but he had the papers, especially the Herald, owned by Engage South, a media company belonging to a Yeatman alum, and the television stations could never resist the pretty face. Arch looked like a savior of the white working class, just as disgust with politicians was peaking. How did a guy like Arch Gray, born into wealth, educated privately from pre-K through graduate school, married to the daughter of a billionaire, as handsome as a film star, with family ties going back almost to Jamestown, become a man of the people? After all, the people are the ones who shop at Walmart, who spend their lives traveling back and forth between back-breaking jobs and weary inertia at home, who end up being forced to live off disability and Medicaid benefits. How on earth could the people see a guy who lived on Bellevue Boulevard as their champion? There is nothing in this world to which people connect more willingly in uncertain times than the appearance of genuine certainty. If there was one true thing that could be said about Arch, it was this: he seemed so sure of himself that people couldn't help but believe in him. All of which led up to that moment on the quad at Yeatman. Just a little more than a decade ago, he said, "I sat where you boys are sitting now at the end of 6 years of the hardest work I've ever done. Trust me, Wall Street is a piece of cake after AP Physics and Latin during football season." So when I was asked to speak to you today, I was a little intimidated. I knew from experience that you hear a lot of speeches. You might get a little numb to so much good advice. Laughter rippled across the assembly. They were all primed to love him before he even opened his mouth. I had spent a lot of time thinking about what I would say to you, Archcanute, and just last week I came across an article in the newspaper that really got my attention. The title of the piece was Why Men Fail. According to this piece, nationwide over the last 10 years, we've seen a sharp decline in male academic performance at every level. Statistically, fewer men are graduating from college than women, and even fewer are going on to complete graduate programs. There are a lot of single moms in America, but they are staying single by choice because the fathers of their children are not providers. So the women are taking care of themselves. When I first started working in finance, my mentor told me that his best employees were single moms, not guys like me. I got the message. This message really got me thinking about the importance of what you have experienced here at Yale. It's trained you to hold on to something most people have lost. Arch let that note linger. A dramatic hush fell over the assembly. While we must meet the challenges of a changing world with fresh ideas and perspectives, there's a sense here in Nashville, and especially at Yeatman, that some of the old stuff is worth holding on to. It's this stuff, these ideals, that are the foundation your life will be built on. He went on like that for a while, paying homage to Yeatman, celebrating the graduating class as exceptions to the trends he just described. He then shifted into his own narrative, the privilege in which he'd grown up, followed by the wrenching ordeal of his father's illness and deterioration and the devastating blow of his death. The courage he'd learned both from the way his father had faced sickness and death and from his mother's stoic determination to nurture and shelter her children while nursing her husband, and after his death, her stoic resolve to shepherd the family through their collective grief. The strength of character and generosity he learned from his Uncle Jim, and the parallels between the path Arch's mother had walked and the one Jim now followed himself as a widower and father of a young daughter. The grace and wisdom Arch had learned with Vanessa by his side, brilliant and driven and more accomplished than most of her male peers. All of it was crafted to signal the formation of his own ambitions, his will to power, as it were, couched in the impression of a labor of love, as an exhibition of noblesse oblige. You are coming of age in a world that wants you to believe it's okay to be mediocre, Arch said. There are no really great men left, the world tells you, so why bother trying to be one? I believe there are bigger things, harder things, things that must be done by the people who are capable of doing them. Our city needs the right kind of leadership to carry us into the new century so that we can build a better future without giving up the best parts of the culture and traditions that define what I like to call the spirit of Nashville. So I'm making it official right here and now. As of this morning, I've resigned my position at Chatterton Dobbs. I'm going to be your next mayor. Before he could say another word, the whole assembly was on its feet cheering. You would have thought someone had paid them. Maybe someone did. I was on my feet as well, my eyes damp with tears of awe and admiration. No one had to pay me. I believed it all. I still do. Some people are exceptional. And without a doubt, Arch was the most exceptional person I ever knew. But no one, however exceptional, transcends the bitter fact of his humanity. Like the man says in that old book they made us read back in senior year, there's always something. And no great temple was ever built without a few bodies buried